That cold morning in Millbrook, only one hand rose at auction, Vincent's, 12 copper coins for a crumbling shack near the Tescan River. The crowd watched in silence, not with envy, with pity, as if he were walking into his own grave. The hammer fell on the oak counter with a dry crack, and the sound rolled through the cold morning air of Millbrook like the closing of a coffin lid. Vincent lowered his hand slowly. Around him, the faces of farmers, merchants, and frontier guards held the same expression. Not contempt, not envy, just pity. The quiet, uncomfortable pity of people watching a man make a mistake they already understood. He didn't care. He took the deed from the council clerk's trembling fingers, folded it once and tucked it inside his worn jacket. 12 copper coins, every last one he owned. The crowd parted as he walked to his horse, a bony brown mare named Dust, without a word to anyone. The land near the Tescan River had been empty for 15 winters. The locals whispered about it in the tavern, the Iron Mug, with lowered voices and careful eyes. They said the old caretaker, a human notary named Samuel Hartwell, had vanished without explanation. They said the cabin was cursed. They said the soil near Crow's Gate smelled of something wrong, something old, something that didn't belong to the world of the living. Vincent had heard all of it. He'd nodded politely and handed over his coins anyway. He had no family left, no rank, no pension from the Iron Frontier garrison where he'd spent 20 years bleeding and watching others bleed. He'd come back from the wars with scars along his left arm, a jaw that ached in cold weather, and a trade, carpentry and rough ironwork, that barely kept him fed. A crumbling shack and 5 hectares of bad land was still more than he'd had yesterday. The road to Thornwood Forest was a muddy lane pressed between walls of dark pine. Dust walked it slowly, hooves sucking at the wet ground. The morning fog sat low and heavy. Vincent rode with his shoulders hunched and his eyes forward, watching the tree line the way a soldier watches a ridge, steady, patient, expecting nothing and ready for anything. Halfway through the forest, he noticed something strange. A crow sat on a low branch beside the road, head tilted, watching him with one black eye. It didn't fly when he passed. Most birds did. This one simply turned its head to follow him, beak slightly open, silent. Vincent looked back once. The crow was still there, watching. He told himself it meant nothing. The Tescan River came into sound before it came into sight, a low, steady rush through the stones below the eastern bank. The trees thinned. The fence posts of the property appeared first, old wood gone grey with rot, half buried in the tall grass that had swallowed the path. Then the gate came into view, and then he saw her, a figure hung from the gate's crossbeam. Not a scarecrow, not a bundle of hides. A body, enormous, long-limbed, with green skin gone pale at the wrists and throat from lack of blood. The rope was thick fibre, coiled tight around a neck wider than Vincent's thigh. Her feet, bare, calloused, each one nearly the length of his forearm, hovered just above the muddy ground. Vincent pulled Dust to a stop. His hand moved to his belt knife without thinking, the way an old reflex bypasses thought. He sat for a moment, very still, watching for movement. The figure's chest rose, barely, with the slow spasm of something fighting to stay in the world. She was alive. He dismounted. The knife was forged iron, heavy-backed, with a blade that could split a green log without complaint. Vincent gripped it tight and looked up at the rope. The beam was low enough. He stepped forward, reached up with his free hand to take some of the weight off the neck, and cut. The body dropped. He had braced himself, but nothing fully prepares a man for the weight of a giant. She came down like a felled oak, and the impact drove his knees into the soft mud. He caught her shoulders, taking the blow with his back and arms, and they both went down, him on his knees, her half across his lap, her head rolling against his forearm. He stayed like that for a moment, breathing hard. She was unlike anything Vincent had seen on the Iron Frontier, and he had seen a great deal. He'd traded with Orc clans at the border posts. He'd seen their warriors at a distance, tall and broad, built like quarry stones wrapped in muscle. But this woman was something beyond that measure. Even unconscious and limp, her frame was imposing. Shoulders wider than a door, arms corded with layers of muscle beneath the green skin, legs that stretched out long in the mud behind him. Her clothing was frontier leather, thick hide pants, a wrap across her chest, both torn and darkened with dried blood. Around her neck, half hidden beneath the rope burn, hung a cord of braided black fibre threaded with small animal bones and one pale green crystal no bigger than a thumbnail, a clan marker. Vincent recognized that much from his years at the frontier. Every Orc clan had one. The shape of the bones, the color of the crystal. He couldn't read it like a native, but he knew what it meant. This woman was no wandering exile. She belonged to someone. He tore a strip from his own linen shirt, rough fabric but clean enough, and wound it carefully around her neck where the rope had burned through to raw flesh. His calloused fingers moved with the careful slowness of a man who had dressed wounds before and knew the damage careless hands could do. Her breathing steadied slightly, not much, but enough. He lifted her, or tried to. 3 attempts, and he managed to get her into something like a seated position against the fence post, then draped her left arm over his shoulders and stood, legs shaking with the effort. She was conscious enough, barely, to push against the ground with one heel and help him move her. He got her onto the porch of the cabin. The door was unlocked. No one had thought to lock an abandoned property, and he shouldered it open and eased her inside. The cabin smelled of dust, cold ash, and old wood. But the stone floor was solid. The iron stove in the corner, though cold, was intact. A heavy oak table stood near the window, scarred but upright. Vincent laid her on the table. She filled it almost completely. He went back outside for his pack and water canteen. The crow was gone from the branch. The forest was quiet. He stood in the cold for a moment, scanning the tree line. That was when he saw it. At the far edge of Thornwood, barely visible between the dark trunks, a horseman, motionless, wearing an iron helmet with silver trim that caught the pale morning light. The rider didn't move. Neither did Vincent. Then, as if the decision had already been made long before this moment, the horseman turned his horse and disappeared into the trees. Vincent went back inside. The woman on the table stirred, her green eyelids moving. He uncapped the canteen, tilted it gently to her lips. Some water ran down her chin. Some went in. Her throat moved. Her breathing shifted into something closer to a rhythm. Her eyes opened. Deep green, shot through with gold near the pupils, and they focused on him with an expression that needed no translation. Pain, fury, and beneath both, a desperate animal need to survive. She tried to speak. What came out was a dry scrape of sound in a dialect he didn't know. He held up the canteen again. "Easy," he said quietly. "You're down. Stay down." She didn't understand his words, but she understood his tone. She slept for most of the day. Vincent used the time to assess what he'd bought. He walked every room of the cabin, tapped the walls for rot, tested the floor planks with his boot heel, checked the stovepipe for blockages. The structure was damaged, but not hopeless. Someone had maintained it, inconsistently, carelessly, until roughly 3 or 4 seasons ago, then abandoned it in place. What troubled him were the small things that didn't fit with honest abandonment. The pantry shelves had been emptied in haste, jars knocked over, a sack of grain spilled and left. A chair lay on its side in the main room, as if someone had stood from it quickly, and near the hearth, scratched faint into the stone with something sharp, a fingernail maybe, or a piece of iron, were 2 letters, S.H. Samuel Hartwell, the notary who had vanished. Vincent stared at the letters for a long time. Then he covered them with the edge of the hearth rug and went back to work. By midday, he had the stove burning with wood cut from a fallen pine near the eastern fence. He boiled water and softened some dried meat from his pack. When the orc woman woke again, her eyes clearer this time, her breathing full and even, he set a tin cup of broth near her hand on the table. She looked at it, then at him. "Naeli," she said. Her voice was rough as gravel, but the word was deliberate. Her name. "Vincent," he said, pressing a hand to his own chest. She wrapped both enormous hands around the tin cup and drank slowly, watching him over the rim with steady, calculating eyes. When she finished, she set the cup down and turned her head to look around the cabin with the careful attention of someone making a tactical assessment. "This place," she said in broken common tongue, "you bought it." 12 coppers, he said. Something crossed her face. Not quite humor, not quite sorrow. "They let you," he nodded. "Nobody else wanted it." She was quiet for a moment. Her fingers moved to the bone and crystal cord at her neck, checking it was still there. She held the green crystal between 2 fingers and closed her eyes briefly, as if confirming something. "The man who lived here before," she said. "Samuel. He found something." "The notary," Vincent said. "He disappeared." "He was killed," Naeli said flatly, "by men with silver on their armor." Vincent's jaw tightened. A silver-trimmed helmet. He had seen one just hours ago, watching from the tree line. "What did Samuel find?" he asked. Naeli looked at him for a long moment. Whatever she was weighing behind those green eyes, he couldn't read it. She was deciding how much to trust a human she had known for less than half a day. "Documents," she said finally. "Proof of what the lords of Goldport have done to my people. Land taken by forged papers, mines sealed and stolen. The blood price of the Peace Valley paid to corrupt men in fine coats." "And those documents are here," Vincent said. It wasn't a question. She looked down at the stone floor. He looked down too. That night, as the fire in the stove threw long shadows across the walls, Vincent sat at the edge of the table and thought about the crow that had watched him on the road. He thought about the scratched initials near the hearth. He thought about the rider in the silver helmet who had come to look but not yet to act, which meant they were waiting for something. Instructions, maybe, or reinforcements. Outside, the Tescan River ran steady and cold in the dark. Something old stirred at the edges of the property, though he couldn't say what. A feeling, more than anything. The kind that soldiers learned to read after enough years. The quiet that wasn't quite quiet. The stillness that held its breath. He checked the bolt on the door and didn't sleep until well past midnight. He left at first light, before the fog had cleared the river. Naeli was stronger. Strong enough to be upright, strong enough to be angry that he was leaving her alone. She stood in the cabin doorway with the old forge hammer from the corner in her right hand, watching him mount dust with the flat expression of someone who had been let down before and was already prepared for it. "I'll be back before dark," he said, "with medicine and food." She said nothing, but she lowered the hammer slightly. He rode the muddy lane to Marek village, the nearest settlement of any size, 3 miles north along the river road. Marek was not a friendly place by nature. It was a frontier town built on suspicion, commerce, and the understanding that the law lived far away and arrived slowly. The people there were not cruel exactly, but they were careful. The general store was run by a thin man named Aldous, with ink-stained fingers and a habit of not finishing his sentences. He packed the herbs and clean bandages without comment, moving quickly, avoiding eye contact. When he pushed the bundle across the wooden counter, his hands were trembling. "Crow's Gate," he said softly. "You went in." "I bought the place," Vincent said. Aldous opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the door. "They know," he whispered. "They've known since the auction." Before Vincent could press him, the back door of the store swung open hard enough to bounce off the wall. The man who walked in wore light plate armor polished to a clean shine, with silver detail work along the pauldrons and collar, the same pattern as the helmet Vincent had seen watching from the tree line the morning he arrived. He recognized it immediately. The same rider, now close enough to confirm. He was tall, broad, somewhere between 40 and 50, with the easy posture of a man accustomed to being obeyed. 2 soldiers followed him and took positions near the door. "Captain Lyon," Aldous said, and stepped back from the counter. The captain let the silence settle before he spoke. He placed a heavy leather pouch on the counter. It hit the wood with the thick, musical sound of many silver coins. 50 silvers, he said, looking at Vincent. "That is 1,000 times what you paid for that property this morning. Take it, ride east, and don't come back to this county." Vincent looked at the pouch, counted the implications. 50 silvers for a rotting shack, he said. "You must be looking for something valuable inside." Lyon's expression didn't change. "I'm buying your life," he said. "Not the cabin. The cabin is secondary. The offer expires at sunset." "And after sunset?" The captain picked up the pouch, unhurried. He turned toward the door, pausing with his back to Vincent. "I've buried men near the Tescan before," he said quietly. "The river takes them south. No one asks where they went." He walked out. His soldiers followed. The door swung shut behind them. Aldous stood frozen behind the counter, his ink-stained hands pressed flat against the wood. "They killed Samuel Hartwell," he said, barely audible. "I know," Vincent said. He picked up his bundle and headed for the door. "Lock your shutters tonight." He rode back hard through the grey morning, eyes moving along the tree line the whole way. When the cabin came into view, the forge hammer was in the doorway, and Naeli was standing upright against the frame, watching the road with the posture of a veteran reading terrain. He tied dust at the post and went inside. "They came to the store," he said. "I know," she said. "I could smell their horses on the wind." She looked at the bundle he carried. "You came back." "I said I would." She regarded him for a long moment with those deep green eyes. Then she stepped aside to let him through the door. Vincent cleaned the rope burn properly this time, using the herbs from Aldous and strips of linen soaked in river water. Naeli sat perfectly still on the edge of the table while he worked, hands flat on her knees, jaw set. She didn't make a sound, though the wound was raw, and he could see from the tension in her neck that the work hurt. "You have done this before," she said. "Frontier garrison," he said. 20 years. She was quiet while he tied the final bandage. Then, "You fought against my people." It wasn't an accusation, just a fact, placed on the table between them, like a stone to be examined. "Sometimes," he said. "Not always. The border disputes were more complicated than the city lords like to tell it." She nodded slowly. "My grandfather says the same, that the wars were made by men in fine coats who never bled in them." "Your grandfather," Vincent said. He sat back. "The clan marker you wear, the green crystal, Northern Mark's pattern." Her eyes sharpened. "You know it. I was stationed at Greystone Pass for 4 years. I traded with the Northern Marks clans every winter season. I know the crystal patterns." He paused. "You're Naeli, granddaughter of Chief Thraka." The name landed differently than he expected, not with pride or warmth, with something heavier, a burden she carried. "They took me 3 weeks ago," she said, 12 of Lyon's soldiers, in the canyon east of the Iron Peaks. She touched her throat carefully. "They didn't kill me. They wanted me visible. A message to my grandfather. Surrender the Iron Frontier border claims, or his bloodline hangs at Crow's Gate." Vincent thought about that, about the 15 years of winter during which no one in Millbrook had purchased this land, about how precisely the message had been staged, the body visible from the road, alive long enough to be found, dead soon enough to be undeniable. Whoever had arranged it was both cruel and precise. "The documents under the floor," he said. "Do you know what exactly they contain?" "Forged deeds," she said, signed under duress or signed by men who were later killed. The names on those documents include the Justice Crane, who runs the Eastern Courts, and Governor Marcus Webb of the Northern Marks. The originals, the real grants and treaties, are what Samuel Hartwell found in the archive at Goldport. He hid copies here before they caught him. How do you know all this? Samuel sent word to my grandfather before he disappeared. She looked at the floor again. He was a good man. He believed in the law. She paused. My grandfather knew the documents existed, but not where they were hidden. Without them, any accusation against Crane and Webb would be our word against theirs, and orcs have no standing in their courts. Vincent stood and walked to the window. The afternoon light was going flat and grey. Somewhere along the eastern fence, a branch cracked. He watched the tree line. "They're already here," he said. "Since midday," Naeli said. "3 on the north, 2 near the river." Turned to look at her. "You've been tracking them from in here?" "The crystal," she said simply, touching the green stone at her throat. "My grandmother taught me to read the land through it. Heartbeats in the soil. It works through stone and wood if you know how to listen." She said it without performance, the way someone states a skill they have carried so long it no longer seems remarkable. He looked out at the thinning light. Sunset was 2 hours away at most. Lion's deadline would come with the dark, and with the dark would come the torches. He crossed to the old iron stove, took the forge hammer from where Naeli had left it leaning against the wall, and set it on the table beside her. Then he went to his pack and drew out his crossbow, heavy, iron-framed, built for war rather than hunting, and began to crank it. "I paid 12 coppers for this house," he said. "It is a poor reason to die," she said. "It's my reason," he said. "You have a better one." She looked at the hammer. Then she picked it up. The weight of it in her hand looked natural, like an extension of her arm rather than a tool. "My grandfather will come," she said. "The clan marks I sent before I was taken. He will have read them. He will be searching." "How long?" "I don't know." She met his eyes. "Long enough that we may need to survive the night first." The sun dropped behind the iron peaks, and the light went with it fast. Vincent had used the last of the daylight to move what furniture he could. The heavy oak table flipped on its side near the front wall. The iron stove dragged a foot closer to the south window to block the angle of fire through the glass. It wasn't much. The cabin had too many openings, too many soft walls. But it was what he had. Naeli had spent the final hour of light moving through the cabin with her eyes closed, pressing her palms flat against the stone floor, the log walls, the wooden beams overhead. He watched her, but said nothing. She was reading the land through the crystal again, mapping it, or perhaps speaking to it. Whatever the ritual accomplished, she moved with the focused calm of someone completing a necessary task. When she finished, she opened her eyes and looked at him. "There are 7 now," she said. "They moved 2 more in from the south road." Then she rolled her shoulders carefully, testing them, and picked up the forge hammer again with both hands. The wound at her throat was bound tight, and though her movements carried the stiffness of someone not yet fully mended, her grip was solid and her feet were planted. She had been a prisoner for 3 weeks and hanged that morning. What was left in her was something that pain hadn't reached. He decided not to waste time questioning it. The first sound came just as the last grey light left the sky. Hooves on the muddy river road, moving at a deliberate pace, not galloping, walking, the measured approach of men who weren't afraid of what they were coming to do. Then Lion's voice, carrying clear across the cold air. "Vincent, come out. The land doesn't belong to you, and neither does the creature inside." Vincent positioned himself to the left of the front door, crossbow raised. "Deed says otherwise, Captain." A pause. Then, "Burn it." The first flaming arrow came through the shuttered east window, the weakest one, which he'd known. It hit the far wall and stuck. a tongue of fire spreading up the old dry wood. Nayeli crossed the room in 3 strides, tore the arrow free with her bare hand, and crushed the flame against the stone floor with her boot. The second came through the roof gap. "South wall!" Vincent shouted, and Nayeli was already moving. He opened the door, fired once into the torchlit dark, heard someone shout and fall, slammed the door, cranked the crossbow again with hands that moved from years of muscle memory rather than conscious thought. His heart was beating hard and steady, the old battlefield rhythm that smoothed everything down to sequence and breath. The north wall began to crack under something heavy and repeated, an axe or a log battering ram. Nayeli moved to it, planted herself in front of the wall, and when the plank finally gave way and an arm reached through, she caught the wrist and pulled. The scream that followed was short. She let go and stepped back. Smoke was building near the rafters. The roof thatch had caught. "We can't hold the building," Vincent said. "No," she agreed, "but we don't need to hold it long." She said it with a certainty that wasn't hope. It was knowledge. She pressed her fingers to the bone and crystal cord again, and from very far away, from the direction of the iron peaks, Vincent heard something, low, deep, a horn made of something older than iron. It rose once, held, then was answered from the north, and then the east. Lion's men heard it too. The battering at the north wall stopped. Voices outside changed tone, louder, sharper, with the specific register of men realizing they have made a calculation error. "Hold your positions." Lion's voice was still commanding, but there was a tightness in it now that hadn't been there before. Vincent kicked open the front door and stepped out into the smoke-lit dark, crossbow raised. 3 of Lion's soldiers stood in the yard, torches held high, staring not at the cabin, but at the road south along the river. Their faces were doing the thing faces do when the size of a problem becomes suddenly visible. The ground was shaking, just slightly, the way it does before a stampede. They came out of the dark like a breaking wave. Dozens of orc riders, mounted on heavy-framed war-horses bred on the frontier plains, poured down the river road with torches of their own, their war shouts cutting through the cold night air in layered harmonics that Vincent felt in his chest as much as heard. Bone-white war paint marked their faces and arms. Iron axes and long spears caught the firelight. Behind the riders came unmounted warriors, just as fast on foot, covering the ground with the long stride of people raised to run. Lion's mercenaries broke in under a minute. Some threw down their torches and ran. Others tried to mount their horses and were cut off before they reached them. A few raised weapons. Briefly. The clash was brief, brutal, and decisive in the way that brief, brutal things always are when one side has numbers, terrain, and fury on their side. Vincent stood at the cabin door with his crossbow lowered, watching. Lion himself tried for the east road, the route back toward Goldport, and whatever protection the corrupt courts there might offer. He had nearly made it to the tree line when 3 riders cut across his path, long spears leveled. His horse reared and stopped. He sat in the saddle for a moment with the expression of a man watching the last door close, then dropped his sword into the mud. 2 warriors dismounted and bound his wrists with leather cord. He did not resist. The fight had gone out of him the moment the horn sounded, and what remained was a man calculating the cost of what he had done and finding no number that helped him. They brought him before Thraka when the old chief arrived. It was over fast. The firelight threw long shadows across the yard. The sound of the Tescan running south filled the silence that followed. Vincent lowered himself onto the cabin steps, just sat down, his legs making the decision before his mind did, and set the crossbow across his knees. The riders parted. An older orc walked his horse through the space they made. He was large. Not as large as Nayeli, but carrying his size differently. with a stillness that made him seem as permanent as the iron peaks behind him. His hair was white, braided with iron beads. Deep scars ran along the left side of his face and down his neck, old and clean, the marks of battles fought long enough ago that they had fully healed. His eyes, when they found Vincent, held the long patience of a man who had seen many things and chosen to understand them rather than simply judge. Chief Thraka of the Northern Marks. He dismounted without ceremony and went directly to where Naeli stood in the smouldering doorway. He wrapped his arms around her, carefully, as one holds something that has been broken and is not yet fully mended, and said something in the clan dialect, low and quiet. She answered in kind. Her voice was steady, but her hands gripped his forearms, and she didn't let go for a long moment. When she finally released him, she turned and looked at Vincent on the steps. "This is the human who cut the rope," she said to her grandfather, in common tongue, for Vincent's benefit. Thraka turned his gaze to him. He studied him for a long, still moment. The worn jacket, the calloused hands, the crossbow on his knees, the 12 coppers worth of half-burned cabin behind him. "You have no clan," Thraka said. Not an insult, an observation. "No," Vincent said. "You bought a cursed property and fought for it anyway." "It was mine," Vincent said. Thraka was quiet for another moment. Then he said something to the warriors nearest him, and 2 of them immediately moved to begin pouring water on the burning sections of roof from buckets pulled from the well. The chief walked slowly up the steps and stood beside Vincent, looking out at the dark road. Lion knelt in the mud nearby, wrists bound, surrounded by warriors. He had commanded men and arranged murders and operated inside the law's blind spots for years. Now he was simply a man on his knees in the dark, waiting. "My granddaughter tells me what is hidden beneath this floor," Thraka said. "We will need it." "It's there," Vincent said. "I haven't touched it." Thraka nodded slowly. "In the morning," he said. "Tonight, you rest." Vincent looked at the damaged cabin behind them, the smoke still rising from the thatch, the wet footprints of warriors crossing his stone floor inside, Naeli standing in the doorway with the bandage still white at her throat, the forge hammer set against the frame beside her. He had bought a crumbling shack near a cursed river and found the edge of a war instead. He was tired down to the marrow of his bones, but the door was still standing, and so was he. Morning came red. The sky above the iron peaks went the color of old copper as the sun climbed, and the Tescan River carried that redness along its current for a mile or more. The Orc warriors had made a rough camp in the yard and along the road, their war horses tied in a long line to the fence. Someone had built a fire and set a pot over it. The smell of something thick and spiced drifted through the cold air. Lion had been kept under guard through the night, wrists bound, seated against the outer fence post. He was alive, silent, and looked considerably smaller than he had the day before in his polished armor. Vincent found Thraka already awake, sitting on a stone near the well, watching the sun come up with the unhurried patience of a man who had watched many sunrises and did not take any of them for granted. Naeli was inside. They went in together, Vincent, Thraka, and 2 of the chief's senior warriors. Naeli stood near the center of the room, in the same spot where she had pressed her palms to the floor the night before. She pointed down. Vincent took his axe and struck twice, hard, near the hearthstone, where the floor looked slightly different from the rest, where the stone had been re-mortared faintly with a slightly darker compound. The wood beneath gave way. Not the floor planks. There was a second layer under them, a false bottom fitted so cleanly it would have been invisible without knowing to look. Inside the cavity, a box of riveted iron, small enough to carry in one hand, and beside it a rolled tube of thick leather. He brought them both out and set them on the table. The box was locked, but the lock was old. 2 strikes of a small iron rod, and it opened. Inside, 6 rolls of vellum, tightly wound and tied with red cord, each one unfurled carefully under the morning light. Naeli had described the contents from memory, from second-hand words passed through messengers before she was taken. But there is a difference between knowing a thing and holding it in your hands. The documents were meticulous, a notary's work, precise and deliberate, every line and signature clear. The forged deeds sat beside the originals, the stolen boundary lines drawn in confident ink next to the real ones. The names Crane and Webb appeared not once, but across multiple documents, a pattern of theft so systematic it could only have been planned over years. Samuel Hartwell had not just found a crime, he had documented an empire built on one. And at the bottom of the stack, a single document written in a different hand, smaller, faster, with the careful phrasing of a man who knows he may not survive what he is writing. It was a sworn testament, signed Samuel Hartwell, notary of the Eastern Courts. Thraka did not read the common script, but one of his senior warriors did. The man translated quietly as he read, and the old chief listened with his eyes fixed on the middle distance, very still. When it was finished, Thraka was silent for a long time. Justice Crane signed the forged deeds, he said at last. Governor Webb approved them. Samuel Hartwell found the originals, understood what they meant, and hid the evidence here, in a property that no one would purchase because everyone believed it was cursed. He paused. Was it cursed? I don't know, Vincent said honestly. Naeli's hand moved to the green crystal at her throat. It was protected, she said quietly. Not cursed. There is a difference. Vincent folded the documents carefully back into the iron box and latched it. I can take these to Marshal Greystone at the Iron Frontier Garrison, he said. He's an honest man. I served under him for 6 years. He has the authority to bring charges that even Webb and Crane can't ignore, if the proof is solid enough. It is solid, said Thraka. He looked at Vincent with those long, patient eyes. And you would do this? Samuel Hartwell hid these here so they wouldn't disappear, Vincent said. Seems a waste to let them disappear now. Thraka stood. He was quiet for another moment. Then he pressed his right fist against his own chest, the Northern Mark's gesture of formal regard, the acknowledgement offered between equals. Vincent returned it clumsily, in the way of a man who knows the meaning but not the full tradition. The old chief almost smiled. Outside, one of the warriors approached and said something in the clan dialect. Thraka answered briefly. He looked at Vincent. Lion will be brought with us, he said. He will answer before the same courts where he arranged his crimes. The evidence in that box will speak against him as much as against Crane and Webb. He said it without satisfaction, just the flat certainty of a man closing a ledger. It is better this way. A living witness to his own corruption is worth more than a body. Vincent picked up the iron box and wrapped it in oilcloth. The ride to the Iron Frontier Garrison took 3 days. Vincent rode with the iron box wrapped in oilcloth inside his pack, flanked by an escort of 8 Northern Mark's warriors that Thraka had insisted on and that Vincent had not argued against. Naeli rode beside him, still bandaged at the throat, still moving with the careful deliberateness of someone not yet fully healed, but determined not to show it. They didn't talk much on the road, but they rode easily side by side, and that was enough. Marshal Greystone received them in his office at the garrison, a spare room of stone and practical furniture with a fire going and a map of the frontier pinned to the wall with iron tacks. He was a large man, gone grey, with honest eyes and the habit of listening without interrupting. He read Samuel Hartwell's testament twice, slowly. He studied each document in the iron box in turn. Then he set them down and looked at Vincent. I always thought those land grants smelled wrong, he said. I know, Vincent said. That was the whole of their reunion. Greystone moved quickly. Within the week, riders went east and west with sealed warrants. Justice Crane was brought from Goldport in iron cuffs on a grey morning, his fine coat muddy from the road. Governor Webb lasted 2 days longer. He tried to ride north into the mountain passes and was intercepted by a patrol that had been quietly placed there 2 days before anyone announced his warrant. Captain Lyon, already in custody and stripped of his silver armour, was brought before the court alongside them. His own signed orders used as evidence against him, his soldiers' testimonies confirming what the documents already proved. All 3 men were brought before the people of Goldport in chains. The crowd was large and very quiet. The documents were read aloud in the square. The forged deeds were held up beside the originals, the real signatures beside the false ones. Samuel Hartwell's testament, the words of a man who had understood what was happening and decided that the truth mattered more than his own survival, was read in full. The Peace Valley land grants were restored to the Northern Marks clans within the month. Vincent heard about the restoration second-hand, by then already back at the Tescan property, rebuilding. Thraka had sent wagons of fresh timber and iron tools, along with 6 of the clan's younger craftsmen who worked alongside him without being asked and without needing direction. The cabin went up straight this time. Solid walls, a proper roof, a new stovepipe set true. The floor was laid over the empty cavity, which they left empty, sealed clean, like a wound that has healed. The people of Marek village began to change the way they looked at him. Not all at once. Slowly, the way trust forms in cold weather, with difficulty and without announcement. The merchants nodded when he passed. The tavern keeper at the Iron Mug, who had once watched him at the auction with barely concealed pity, offered him a drink without being asked, and didn't charge for it. Naeli came back when the first cold of the new season settled on the Iron Peaks. She arrived on a dark morning with the wind at her back, carrying a rolled bundle of heavy orc-tanned hides and a new bone-handled knife for his belt. She didn't announce she was staying. She didn't ask if she was welcome. She simply dismounted, tied her horse, and went inside to start the fire. He let her. Winter came in hard and clean that year, and the cabin held it. On the road through Thornwood, the branch where the crow had sat all those months ago was empty now, and had been since the morning Vincent carried Naeli inside. He had noticed its absence only later, the way you notice a sound has stopped only after the silence has settled. He did not think it was a coincidence. He did not think the bird had simply moved on. Some things stand watch until they are no longer needed, and then they go. By the time the first snow fell over Thornwood, the place looked like what it was now, lived in, useful, solid. The old gate had been replaced with new timber, and on the crossbeam where a rope had once been, there was a short iron bar from which hung 2 things, a forge iron bracket in the Northern Marks clan pattern, and a small carved word in plain common script. Shelter. The crow never came back to that branch. The initials near the hearth remained under the rug, not hidden exactly, just given their privacy, the way the names of the dead deserve. The cavity under the floor held nothing now but old air. Somewhere in Goldport, the courts moved slowly toward whatever justice courts arrive at. Somewhere in the Peace Valley, families were planting seed on land that was theirs again. And at the edge of the Tescan River, a man who had spent everything he owned on 12 copper coins sat by a fire that had been started by hands larger than his own, and found that the thing he had been looking for, without knowing what to call it, had been here the whole time, waiting under a rotting floor in a property no one else had wanted. Not gold, not documents, not even justice, though that had come. Just a place to stand, and someone to stand in it with.